So I am going to go ahead and unmute here. I feel like I'm standing in a silent room all by myself with just some names, although I'm fairly certain there are other people in this room. And isn't this the oddity of remote conversations? So I want to just welcome folks. We won't start right away, but I just wanted to make a connection with the people in the room. If we were actually joining in a room together, we would be having some exchanging some information and having a chat. And we're all in our own home. So just wanted to reach out. I have on my clock, we're 2 minutes before the hour, and would, as was mentioned in our materials, this is very conversational. So we'd love for you to add to the chat anything that's on your mind, or a topic that you'd like to discuss, a question that you maybe hope, not that you have to ask it, but you maybe hope that we get to or address. So I just wanted to say welcome. We'll start in just a moment, and we really welcome you to use the chat box. Cool. I can see that Corey's on. Nice to see you there, friend. And Cody. Hey, Cody. Great. Let's rock and roll. We just have such a short time, and this is such a big topic. So we'll just pop right in. I am going to kick us off, offer a brief introduction, and we'll move really quickly into conversation. My name is Katie Miller. I am the Chief Innovation Officer at ALIA, and I'm joined today by some of our other Team ALIA colleagues. You'll see Cody in the yellow shirt. He is helping us with some tech support today. So if you have any questions at all, he is ALIA, well, no, he's Cody. He's not ALIA 1 anymore, he's Cody. So if you have any questions or are disconnected for whatever reason, just send him a chat. I hope you're all here for a discussion on anti-racism in rural, mostly white communities. That's the topic of the day. And a brief intro to the hour. So who we are, I mentioned who I am. To my left on my screen is Corey Best. He is a trusted friend and advisor, and is familiar with many different angles of the child welfare system in many different parts of the country, and is an ALIA board member. He is works with our 5-agency cohort that I'll just tell you about in a moment. So he will also be offering some inspiration and observation and conversation. I know that he has been really part of helping Aaliyah as an organization think about our anti-racism work. So we're really glad to have you. Welcome, Corey. Oh, great. I know. We got Corey's fan club is on. So I'm a proud member too. Great, Ellen. So glad you're here. Again, Cody is going to kind of help us be moderating, so feel free to use the chat you'll see on the screen. It is a conversation, so use the chat box freely or just jump in. Really happy to have you pop on and share your comments to the group as well. I want to talk a little bit about Aaliyah, and I will talk about the cohort just to frame this conversation a little bit. We may ask some prompting questions along the way, and we'll wrap up with possible next steps. So there's just really a few slides. We have about 9 or 10 slides, that's all. And this is really conversation based because we do have such a short amount of time. And then as far as the how goes, you are invited to, as I mentioned, participate via chat or unmute yourself and say a thing, or you are welcome to use there's an emoji. There is reactions that you can put a clap reaction. We can kind of indicate what pieces of it you are resonating with. I also want to remind you that you can change the view of this, that you can look at all of the participants, or you can look at just the slides, it's pretty deliberately unstructured because we're really keen to hear from you. Does anyone have any questions about that at all? We just at a very basic level would hope that you are joining us today with curiosity and openness and a spirit of engagement. So that's why we're here. Thanks, Sherry, for your note. So glad to have you. And with that, we will move into a bit of content. Aaliyah is a national nonprofit. We're located in St. Paul, Minnesota, and our goal is to help the leaders and innovators in child welfare to transform our public system towards one that has obsoleted the need for foster care at all. We're really about keeping kids safely with their families and not from their families. One of our initiatives is an unsystem innovation cohort, and that is a 5-jurisdiction, 4-state, 15-county group of people, and we've been meeting since 2018. And our shared goal is that family connections are always preserved and strengthened. So our conversation today comes largely from this group of people. The agencies that you see represented on the screen are where the cohort agencies are located, and most all of them are in rural areas. And in parallel at Aaliyah, we've been talking quite a lot recently in the last year or 2 years about anti-racism work in our agency, in our space. We're in a metro area. All these places are in rural areas, and we know that there obviously are connections, and we have had some stops and starts around how do we fit this conversation into the work that the agencies are doing in their rural areas. So anti-racism is kind of one of the challenges that we've had in the Unsystem Innovation cohort. What I wanted to also highlight is on our website at aaliyahinnovations.org. You will also find our recently published case study. A couple of months ago it came out, and also talks about quite a lot of our successes. The leaders, again, that you see here on the screen and our professional lived experience guides have done just a terrific job of decreasing removals and increasing the number of kids that remain home and get home. So please please, please, please go and read all about their great work. And today, our topic is, what does anti-racism work look like in rural areas? So that's that piece of it, super quick context. And then I wanted to offer just a little bit about sort of our frame, how we are looking at this. So at Aaliyah, our fundamental belief is that the concept of race was designed for a power imbalance. And so we treat it as a made-up social construct. We also regard racism as trauma and treat it as such in a healing way, and really believe that anti-racism is trauma healing work and also very critical to systems change. You can read more about how Aaliyah, how we are doing that as an organization at our website. I've included the link, but just to give you an idea of sort of how we're approaching this work. So we're really interested to have Corey share with us about his insights as we again are trying to merge our anti-racism work with specifically our cohort that is represented in largely rural areas. So Corey, I'm gonna just toss it over to you.
Well, thank you, Katie, and good afternoon to you all. So it's really tough to know where to begin, but I took a few notes because we are laser focusing on how we perform, act, look at structural racism from within an urban or all-white institution. I first want to commend Aaliyah for taking the leap and allowing me the invitation to learn from the work that they've done, recognizing that many of the institutions that we're connected with are indeed white. I want to unpack a few things, or at least elevate a few things, and you may leave here with more questions, hopefully, than you have answers. The first is, I want to talk a little bit about the power of taking a structural analysis and how that helps us, especially in all white institutions, begin to see where norms have been established, who established those norms, how to look and analyze structural occurrences, practices, and policies that drive your institutional behavior based on othering individuals. The proximity. So in many white communities, the proximity to difference, blackness, otherness, presents a set of challenges, meaning that many of the biases or images that we see, or the biases we gather and the images we see, come from media, come from different sources, right? So you may have one or two, like Wisconsin is a 98% white state. And we know that research tells us that 80% of middle income or upper income white people live in neighborhoods that are 85% white. So we have the influx of Black people are in Milwaukee. And so some other counties may realize, well, we only have a 2-3% population of Black people. So I beg the question, why do you think that is? Right? So begin to really examine even your history, to center experiences of Black, Indigenous, people of color, and those with maybe disabilities or who identify sexually differently than you. Recognize again where the norms come from. Something that I really want to elevate before I get to the privilege of not having to see racism is that our frames that we rely on are deeply embedded in our psyche. So Stuart Hall presented us with a body of research that encouraged white institutions to really examine the fact that their dominant frames require significant work and, wait for it, a decoding. So we're coded, meaning that structural racism is embedded in our psyches, in our system, in our soil. So we live in a segregated community. I've done some work with multiple organizations that have sort of a workforce that are almost 100% Black, and in one community I worked with, I was only the third Black person in the room, and we're talking about slavery, and we're talking about biases and white privilege, and that wasn't well received. But what I come to realize is that uh, the racial discourse from a white perspective starts with our national values. So in an organization that looks at otherness, look at our national values, right? The white dominant perspective tells the story of meritocracy, the story of personal responsibility and individualism, right? The story of equal opportunity. If that were true, I'd ask you to just entertain me for a 3-second game of Monopoly, and we'll take it in blocks of time, right? So the 3-second game of Monopoly tells me that between 1865 and 1877, let's say, that's the first hour. Well, we have freed the slaves, so therefore the playing field is level, right? Racism was in a block of time. Okay, second hour of Monopoly will go from 1965 to, let's say, 1993. Well, in the 1960s, you have the Civil Rights Act. So we gave Black people all they need. They have equal access. They should be able to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. Correct? Well, we begin to see also from the 65, the slave codes. We also noticed that from the 1800s, we also saw slave codes, Jim Crow, segregation, World War II, lack of housing, and also opportunity. By the third round of Monopoly, let's just say we elected Barack Obama. Wow, we get to go around the board one time. We get around that board, we collect that $200, but you know what? It says we cannot buy any property that is worth more than $150. But by the time we even scrape up that 150, we put 50 in our pocket from the 200 we received for going past go. We noticed that all of the property was already sold, bought up, or even stolen. So when you think about all white communities, the first question I ask many institutions is, do you know why you're all white? Do you know the history of your state? So in Wisconsin, for instance, there were no anti-miscegenation laws, basically, but the climate in Wisconsin wasn't very welcoming. There were a few Black slaves in Wisconsin, but there was also this mantra that Blacks were not wanted in Wisconsin. So through the fur trade and also Great Migration, many Blacks went to seek different opportunities because we heard that there were greater opportunities in other states. Wisconsin and some of those Midwestern states were not the most welcoming, and therefore you have segregated states. The other observation, Katie, I think is important to elevate when it comes to working or partnering or building community, I like to call, with white institutions, is the avoidance of even seeing race. And sometimes it's evasive. Sometimes we call it colorblind racism. But I'll also say there are a few fears that have to be sort of confronted first. So in white organizations, I've noticed that the fear of appearing racism is scary. The fear of taking responsibility for inequities is scary. Anxiety and defensiveness runs rampant and also impedes the opportunity to have effective, honest, wholesome conversation centered around race. So therefore, we can deny from a white perspective, we can deny that racism even exists because of our proximity to power. And when I say power, I'm talking about skin privilege power, right? So back to the color blindness for just a moment. And I have a few questions, and I'm hoping that I can pause here in a moment and not get too far in the weeds and really have a deeper conversation. But I want to get to color blindness for just a moment. You know, it really takes a considerable effort to see people. How can we deem our institution anti-racist if we refuse to see the impact of racism on Black and brown body. So therefore, it takes an opportunity for us to see race before we can actually do anything about it institutionally. And the crux there is once we begin to see, we also begin to understand what we've attached to the skin color. So it's less about the Black and brown skin, but it's more about what we've attached to that. And a piece of inspiration that I'd like to just leave you with. And again, this is 450 years plus of information I'm trying to cram into 3 minutes here. So bear with me. But I really want to get to the point here. Katie touched on it a little bit, but I'll pick it up a bit more. Whiteness was a construct. So before there was whiteness, there was a fight between elitism and others, right? So think about how your worldview is shaped based on a set of principles of false superiority. You can see this show up even in your white institutions with all white staff members because we have a set of values. So when there are individuals in your institution that are hurting, do we discriminate against them or do we embrace them? When members of your community are living in poverty, even if they are white, do we deem them to be less worthy of our services and run them through the ringer as well? The inspiring piece here is that if the world could deconstruct the system of indentured servitude and construct whiteness, we can deconstruct whiteness and construct the system of systemic and institutional justice and equity. So it takes us to realize, one, the history, how the history plays out in our world today, and our proximity to other influences to help us understand different ways of being in the work. That is a global view. I have some tips and strategies if those questions come up. But Katie, I know we only have 60 minutes, and for those who know me, I am an over talker. So I will.
An over talker. Yeah, and I think, I mean, so maybe what Corey just shared is a reflection. I mean, we went and went at this at a bunch of different angles. We talked about white privilege and whiteness and the history, and why is there a good part of our part of our country that is just almost all white, and how did that come to be, and how do you have that conversation with folks in rural areas if it doesn't even feel like this applies? So I would really love for somebody to kind of share their experience, share their challenge, ask their questions about what it looks like in their space to have conversations like this. I'm sharing a slide that just says starting point, self-awareness is it, have the conversation with others is you first, of course, have to have your own, I know what my identity is and how am I coming to the work and what are my activators. So who would be willing to either chat or just pop on and share some of their experience and challenges here?
So I just have a question, kind of. How do you talk to people about who insists that the Black Lives Matter movement is, and please forgive me for what I'm about to say, but the Black Lives movement is similar to the white supremacy stuff, and all lives matter is what the big thing is here in rural Iowa. Is, everybody gets really heated over it, and they're like, no, all lives matter. We're not racist, all lives matter. So like, how do you explain? It's like, yes, but that's not the point. I don't know. That's some of the struggles and the pushback and the very heated arguments that I have seen in the work that we've done.
Anyone else have any experience with All Lives Matter, or what those conversations are looking like in your space?
Yeah, I could add, just to build off what Amanda said. I deal with people like that as well who say all lives matter, like blue lives matter, and I think people like those, they don't understand the basis of the conversation of Black Lives Matter. And when you try to explain it, I think you're dealing with certain people that aren't open-minded or curious about what the basis of Black Lives Matter is, or other conversations. So then when do you come to a point where it becomes sort of not useless, but there's a barrier where you can't have a conversation where understanding is being like, or curiosity of what the other side it means and is trying to stand for. When you have that barrier, when do you end that conversation, or how do you reapproach the conversation with people who aren't open to that? So it's definitely a struggle. Do you continue pushing, or do you stop the conversation? So Amanda, I definitely know what you're talking about.
So
Sherry, I can see your head nodding, like doing a whole lot of that. You want to chime in?
I would love to. I'm with Bethany Christian Services. We're a national network, been in child welfare a really long time, predominantly white institution, and all that comes with that, right? And so, like, there have been pockets within our network who have been doing anti-racism work for years. But there was just a huge trajectory because of everything that happened in the world, which has been happening for many, many, many years, but it just, boiled to the surface again recently.
Mm-hmm.
And I will say, like, there will always be the people who reject even entering into this conversation, but two things that have helped us recently. One, like, it has to start with education, and you have to start with the people who, like Cody said, are willing to learn more, and educate, and have them go through anti-racism training. And so for the people, so training and organizing are my two quick things. Like, I could say so much, but to boil it down, it's those two things. So you find the people who are willing to learn, and you get them to the appropriate anti-racism training, understanding the historical aspects of systemic racism in this country, how that shows up in child welfare, huge. And then you start organizing with those people. And then when events in the world happen and people are willing to listen, then you start sharing the message more and more broadly. And we've just seen that work at Bethany. We've been in this work, like I said, in pockets for years and years and years. But because we had organized and we had a whole framework within our sector or within our network who was way down the journey of anti-racism, when all of the George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, stuff hit the media and the world changed quickly, we had a group that had already organized and had frameworks. And now everyone's going to them and say, hey, what have you done? What have you built? How are you holding people accountable? That we were able to leverage.
So if I may just chime really, really quickly, two points. One, thank you, Sherry and Amanda, for the question. One of the most challenging things about anti-racism work is how pernicious and self-correcting structural racism is. So what I mean by that is, Amanda, it's an opportunity right now to take the knowledge that you have and internalize what meaning or sense you're making of it for yourself. To utilize what we do at Aaliyah, not fight the current system, but build a new one that obsoletes the old. That mantra, that value could become very helpful, and it'll help you in your battle, because even with facts and evidence that racism is a real thing, even with what happened with George Floyd, we have not seen a national acknowledgement that there is even a problem. So the officer hasn't come forward and said that what he did was an act of racism. That was our observation, and we haven't seen many institutions even make that sort of acknowledgement. So my suggestion to you would be not to try to change the minds of others, but to continue to try to change your own mind and your own thinking. And that institutional organizing that Sherry is talking about will help you be able to get with like-minded people, organize, and be able to really laser focus on ways of moving from the interpersonal dimension of racism and focusing on how the structures impact the institution that you work within.
Yeah, right. And Jessica's chatting something here too, that sometimes a visual can be really helpful and to make some sense of you know, some of the dynamics. And I wonder, Corey, if you could talk a little bit too about some of the, just in general, about some of the work that you've done in the rural areas of the cohort that are, you know, 93, 94, something, you know, percent white. You know, what are those, what are the first pieces of conversation that you're having with those teams?
You know, I see a few on the call who have been in those spaces with me. So if I misspeak, please fill in the gaps, and this may be an opportunity to
Love to hear from them too. Yeah, absolutely.
to elevate what those experiences look like. I'll first speak for my way of often upholding the current system. See, in Black Body, I've been taught and fed a bill of goods that are no good, that I am not to piss off a white person, especially a white person of power, because objectivity and subjectivity plays a huge role in how I experience racism and the empirical data of a white person's perspective of how they see racism. So my position alone gives them the impression that, oh, you made it, why can't all make it, right? Mm-hmm. So what I've done is learned how to be authentic. And see, what that means is I've learned to critically analyze my thinking, to think on my own, not based on what the world has taught me about groups of people. Because if I lead with how the world teaches me about dominant white organizations, I would hinder the work. So steps 1 through 3 is to really set the tone that there's no end game here. What we're attempting to do, because what I've learned from predominantly white leaders and workers is that they have a set of tools, technical tools, that get them through the assessment, get them through when the court date is here for the parent, when to contact, the resources to provide, the referral to give, and the tools that white people overall have been given don't work in the conversation of anti-racism. So they have an opportunity to withdraw or lean in, right? So they have plenty of choice to avoid the conversation or dig deeper into the conversation. What I've found effective in sort of this staging process, which is stage 1, is to create an environment that is not built on safety, because safety is often looked at from safe for white people, right? Safe for my experiences. I choose to build braver spaces where we co-create ways of being in that space and attempt to allow the group to hold one another accountable. That's sort of the beginning of forming a community. And then I ask those really easy for me, but tough questions. What drives inequities? Why is your institution predominantly white? How does the one person of color play a leadership role in equity or building a bridge with community? The second is not to approach, I personally try not to approach the work from I am a teacher, because I get frustrated if I say I'm trying to teach white people how not to be racist, right? That brings up a lot of trauma for me. So what I try to do is to be a guide, a messenger, and to always recognize that I'm a lifetime learner, and that when I opine something, those opinions are informed by evidence and fact. So the staging process is critically important. I feel that that sets up white institutions to begin to look at their own structure and look at the parallels. See, many white institutions work with predominantly white poor families, but to look at the draw parallels of the structural from the structural analysis to how that shows up in their institutions, and then they're able to create some sort of equity strategies. But what the beauty is in that sort of stage two, where there's some group values and norms, is we begin to have the conversation. I feel that it is a relief for white organizations to understand their role, and also that they have a benefit when the conversation is predominantly white, a benefit of not being as uncomfortable because they don't have a population of Black people in that space to prevent them from being authentic in that space. They can be real, just like Black caucus, white caucus, right? They can be authentic in there and examine without feeling as if someone's watching, right? And this is like, I'm talking about many institutions only have a handful, 3, 5, 10 people who are of color. So create the space, set the norms, be authentic, and intentionally create what I like to call a movement making group. That movement making group becomes sort of the group that sets the tone, and then within that group, they build capacity, and they'll be able to share some of that influence and information to other areas of the institution. But finally, you know, you will not be able to transmit anything you don't possess. So
Right.
many white organizations and leaders want to get to equity practice before they get to equity learning.
Mm.
And in this work, we can learn and do at the same time.
Should be for sure. Cool, thanks. Is there anyone on the call in those groups that would be willing to kind of share from their perspective too? I feel like it's a theme of self-awareness for sure. I also am really interested in hearing from the folks who are on, where does this, like, where specifically do you see this showing up? We had conversations too in preparation for this call about why and where in a rural area would it feel like, oh wow, this is like a real thing, like this is more than just diversity training, like we got to do this, is a dynamic that we need to address. And what might that, where might those spaces be? We talked about adoptions, and we've talked about removal, or where specifically are you all folks on the call seeing that this is becoming this is offering an awareness that there's a problem here?
I can throw in just a quick thought. Working in a very, very rural, homogenous area, I think
can you tell us who you are? Just tell us what your name.
Sorry, yeah, my name
great.
is Dustin. I work in,
hey, Dustin.
I'm a foster care coordinator, work in central
Perfect.
Wisconsin, in a pretty rural area. And I would say like the self-awareness is definitely one piece. But just, from some of my observations, right, people are in really different spots in terms of kind of where they are in that awareness, and kind of how ready they are to hear and have really some of these conversations at all. And I think that shows up in a lot of different ways. And I think, for people we're talking about, how do you find the people who are there and spread the education in that way? But I think something I've seen too from our perspective is that there's just really a need to kind of help people, I don't know the right way to say it, but maybe feel comfortable enough to kind of show some of that vulnerability themselves, right? Because for some folks that I've observed, a lot of these conversations are genuinely coming up for the first time. Like, these are things that they have not thought about And we know it's really, even if you just take the race piece out of it, it's hard for people to understand things they have not experienced. And so I think I've seen it turn, conversations that were, very beautifully facilitated and challenging and important information where people sometimes get really defensive and maybe not ready to kind of challenge themselves, get a little bit, just kind of try to discredit the information instead. So I don't claim to have the solution to that, but I think that's definitely an experience I've observed. And I just think it's important to allow people to kind of recognize where they're at, but I don't want to just kind of discredit those people and leave them behind. You know what I mean? I want to have that conversation too.
I feel like maybe I can see a comment in the chat here from Hannah. I don't know if you want to just kind of expand on that, Hannah, but she's saying that our predominantly white communities have a real sense of disenfranchisement from centers of decision making and power. Many feel like their experiences, needs, and struggles are not heard, and their knowledge and expertise is not acknowledged. This exacerbates the deafness, defensiveness, and anger responses that often arise in Black Lives Matter conversations. So I think, as in any relationship building, trying to have an understanding of where the other person is coming from, I think certainly makes some sense. Does anyone have any thoughts or reactions to that, Corey or other folks?
Well, yeah, I mean, I have several, but I'll share one, and it's fundamentally important for us as a group of people to begin to make all men are created equal a reality. In order to do that, we have to understand truly at the core what racism is. Racism is a system, and I won't give the definition, but a part of racism to continue to perpetuate the inequities and churn the inequities we see is to also eradicate cross-racial solidarity. Okay, so I mean it goes back to history and power. Once upon a time, Irish, Jewish, Italian people were not white, right? So when you look at why defensiveness, anger responses over member of our American body is suffering, and we can sort of demonstrate, I don't believe it's callousness or hate or what have you. I just believe that it's really basic, that our self-interests are more important than the fact that other people are hurting, especially when we're not being race explicit, understanding where disparities come from, and also weaving in the threads of oppression. See, the pedagogy of oppression really teaches us that even oppressed people want to mimic their oppressors, right? So the proximity and also the belief that has been ingrained in us is that overwhelmingly, many groups of people do not believe that Black people deserve this much damn attention, and that people sometimes need to get over themselves, pull themselves up by their bootstraps, and get over it. Racism is dead and gone, and here I am living in a white rural community in a trailer, and I have not a pot to piss in nor a window to throw it out of. So I'm hurting. Why aren't people paying attention to me? At the core of everything this comment says, it's more about my personal interest as it is opposed to communal health. Thoughts about that? Katie, you still with me?
I'm right here.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. I'm not afraid of a little silence. Yeah.
Neither do I.
What's going through my head is just around, white privilege and some conversations that I have with, I don't know, folks that I know just don't believe that that's something that exists. And especially if you've had it really hard, you can say, I wasn't privileged for anything. I worked really hard, or, the meritocracy. And I find it to be, I feel like part of your core, your frustration is like, it feels, when we're saying like we have to understand where people are coming from, it feels like centering their experience again, which feels like a reflection of white supremacy. Am I getting that right? And
Absolutely. No, that's
oh
way
no.
off. That's
Oh, okay.
way off.
Okay.
What I'm saying here is not what you said about understanding people's experiences. In Black Body, I've been taught to learn how to live white cultural dominant beliefs, right?
Okay.
So what white people haven't been taught is how to embrace the pain and trauma of our suffrage, right? So when it comes to this opportunity to create cross-racial solidarity, movement making, when we can do that, we realize that we are stronger when the whole is stronger.
Mm-hmm.
See, this comment and this observation tells me that there's division ingrained, embedded in the thinking. This group of people with this thinking do not feel attached to Black people as a part of their whole. That is segregation. That is historical context coming to life in the present. It's not that I am dismissing anyone else's experiencing. I'm asking people to move from myopia from the individual and see how the structure and the institution has impacted us all. And so white individuals do have a level of privilege, even in the bottom rung. The poorest group of white people have 10 times more wealth than the poorest group of Black people, right? So, I mean, again, facts don't sell, but you mentioned privilege, and it's, I'll channel, I'm just reading Peggy McIntosh, right? She says for white people, she realized that she had been taught about racism as something that puts others at a disadvantage, but had been taught not to see one of its corollary aspects, white privilege, which puts her as a white person in the advantage. I have come to see white privilege as an invisible package of unlearned assets that I can count on in cashing in each day, but about which I was meant to remain oblivious. White privilege is like an invisible weightless knapsack of special provisions, maps, passports, code books, visas, clothes, tools, and blank checks. So this cry for look at me, Black Lives is not asking for charity. Black Lives is not asking for anything other than acknowledgement and hey, we are hurting a little bit, right? And so if I am considered a part of a whole, see, it wasn't slavery, Katie, now you got me on a tangent here, but it wasn't slavery that made, it wasn't the peculiar institution of slavery that made it so barbaric. What made slavery really a moral failing was that those little words that was put into the US Constitution, all men are created equal. That has not become true. And so it's less about the amount, right? The amount of inequality, because I think people who have been oppressed recognize, and I think white people recognize it too, that we've all been oppressed. We've all had some level of discrimination, been hated on, but those things are much different than racism, right? And so it's not that inequality exists or should not, it's the gap in the inequities that are so glaringly large that have caused us to look at life or death. And it is a matter of just that. And so we have opportunity not to see, or take responsibility for how I see the world, right? I mean, a lot. It's a lot.
I know. I know. I
And I don't
know.
want, I don't want white people or white institutions to feel like that they need to have the answers, right? Black people or people of color or poor white people, they're not looking for saviors, right? Some recognition, some acknowledgement.
Yeah, and I feel like too, with just in with this time right now, part of it is part of the service that we can do to ourselves, to our communities, is just to gain some fluency in having a conversation. Like, how do I hear myself talk about this? How do I hear other people talk about this? And just being more comfortable with the theme. So I feel like it's, again, as Resma Menakem says, we're just getting our reps in. Like, we're just practicing, practicing, hearing other people's ideas and responding in authentic ways. So I would love to hear, folks who are on the call, responses to the conversation or what Corey just said. Hannah responded to again and talked really about the rugged individualism. And kind of unpacking the power and other values that exist that really are inextricable to whiteness and white supremacy and racism. We chatted a little bit in preparation for this call again about, what questions you could maybe ask yourselves. We're going to send a follow-up too with some additional information of what is a conversation starter you can have in your agency or with other people or your friends or family or leadership team. And part of this is, what you see on the screen here, what does it even mean to be white? What is whiteness? One thing that I, learned when I was growing up, or how, I guess nobody really said this, but was that white is the normal human experience, and other people with other color skin are a type of people, and white people are like regular people. And that just takes a lot of, it's just a new way of seeing. And then so I wonder if any of these prompting questions might also be interesting or helpful for you or in your spaces. Maybe somebody would share about their, I want to talk about white privilege a little bit. And does that, how do you all see this in your areas? Is this something that people would say doesn't really exist, or are you in a place where it's like we see it but we don't know what to do about it? Give us a read.
So, hi, I don't know if you can hear me because I'm in my car actually driving and I'm on my phone.
Hi, Becky, we can hear you. Yep, cool, thanks.
Sorry, this is Becky's mother. And Corey and I know each other. I just wanted to kind of step in, also being from the evil state that Corey mentioned of Wisconsin. And I want to go back to the conversation that Corey just mentioned and the comments that the person posted that kind of prompted that thought. And I totally, I think, understand Corey's frustration, but I do think that having the language of the conversation is a really important point that you're bringing up, that it is about practicing, but just coming up with words that can kind of express fairly succinctly to folks if they're kind of missing the point without diminishing anyone. Like, without diminishing them by saying, well, I know that you've had a tough life and you're, right now you are in an economically very unstable situation, but we're not talking about that. Seems diminishing of that person and really closes their ears to the conversation. And at the same time, we aren't talking about that. So how do we get those words across? It's kind of like the question of all lives matter versus Black Lives Matter. And, I've finally gotten to the point where I either have a conversation where I try to build empathy for somebody, like imagine if this were a family member and you said, well, I love everybody when they ask, do you love me? And I also sometimes say, well, then prove it. If all lives matter, and we know that there are groups of people, and in particular, African American or Black American people in our state that are suffering, and there's no question about that, then you have to prove it. And that means you have to vote for policies and think about how you in your own life are going to exhibit that.
Yeah, absolutely. Ellen said something in the, thanks for popping on, Becky. I really appreciate that. Ellen also said something in the chat around, what entry point would you suggest for a white child welfare leader in a mostly white county who feels unsure of their readiness to even raise the conversation among their staff? Unfortunately, the disproportionate child welfare data is not moving the needle, and I would totally agree. I'm guessing you would too, Corey, but just putting the data in front of people about the disparities is not it does not light the fire, and that's not going to be the only motivating factor. So who on here, maybe Amelia, you want to just share in the group what you just chatted here, and then have some ideas about Ellen's question. I don't want to put you on the spot. Anyone can.
I just say quickly to Ellen before Amelia that what I've learned in another rural county in central Wisconsin is to, again, we lead from power often, right? So ask your workforce. Ask your workforce what the entry points are to begin to have this conversation. Gauge their readiness for the conversation. Ask really simple questions. Do you want to be a part of this? Is there any particular pieces of education that you currently have? What's the best way to structure these conversations? Equity is including people who are left in the margin. Even if they're white, many of your staff feel left in the margin. So include them in how you form this conversation, and you'll find some entry points.
Hey, Amelia.
Great. Hi. I did just put something in the chat. There's a couple things I want to go back to something Corey said, though, as a starter, which is starting the questions about why. Like, why is your area mostly white? Why do mostly white people work here? Just asking the why. And I think digging into the just historical facts is a place to start. That's kind of just learning history without really kind of getting into it as a starting place. Always, as was mentioned, the starting place of self, just coming to awareness of your own biases and privilege and positionality, I think is always a great place to start. What I chatted in the chat was that I also just found, we've done a lot of work together in leadership and staff together at ALEA because we're a smaller organization. But there was a point where I felt like I needed to do this work independent of my team and with other leaders so that we could talk about the intersectionality of power and privilege and race and how that showed up in our organizations or in our own leadership, and ways to talk about that in kind of safe space. So I put together a small group of trusted other executive leadership that I talk through about every 3 weeks, every 3-4 weeks, just topics that are coming up or things I've wondered about, or we share things we've read, or we ask each other for really kind of brutally direct feedback that maybe our team or our staff might not feel comfortable to give us. And so that's another option too.
I realize I'm missing a word in one of these. It was covered up by my video, and you can see here it says, what makes you most in conversation about race? What I was meant to say was what makes you most fearful in conversations about race. That's just one thing to unpack as well. Like, what am I really scared of? Corey mentioned that, but I just wanted to acknowledge that there. We just have a few minutes, and we wanted to also offer just some kind of what to expect. You may or may not already be in these places with yourself or with folks in your community about having conversations, you know, like this. And Mandy mentioned something similar early on of like, I don't know what to say. So there's a defensiveness that can arise, be like, well, I'm not so bad, you know, or this isn't my fault, or you're feeling blamed about some things. I'm talking about a white person's perspective here. And just not knowing what to do or not knowing what to say. I mean, there's a lot of, you know, discomfort that can occur. So just want to put that out there. Does anyone have any kind of last, you know, questions or comments, or sharing their own experience with having conversations about race and racism in rural areas? I think I'll just leave it there if Corey wants to say something.
No, I was just thinking about, you know, there.
I don't know.
I don't know, but no,
I
I'm
don't
just
know.
thinking about, you know, just to pick up on blame. So there are some things that we call choice points as we begin to analyze the system, and one is we want to move from blame to cause, right? From shame to solution, from grievance to systemic solutions, and that'll help us get beyond the small I self me that really drives the isms, right? That it is not, it is political, it is personal. They will merge and morph into your professional world, but that this is not a personal attack. We know that you did not cultivate the structures in which we inherited, right? So there are some things that are clearly evident. So give credit for the knowledge that Black and Brown and others have, including poor white. Seek their experiences, seek their guidance, and if you sort of embrace or take something from them as far as their ideas, guidance, support, leadership, please be sure to follow through on what you've done. And just with any other relationship, keep the lines of communication open with those that you are attempting to build community with.
Hey, big thanks for everyone joining. And we're real keen to continue this conversation. So email us about this. We're having another session about a theme that's been arising in the Unsystem Innovation Cohort. And that theme is pushback to leaders in times of change. So it's a related theme, and we're gonna address that in our live session in October. So, hey, Corey, thanks for bringing all your perspectives and bringing yourself to the group. So thank you. Appreciate everyone who's joined. I can see all of your names and photos. If you have any parting thoughts or questions, please enter in the chat. And we will send some follow-up information, some of the things that Corey said and the questions that were asked. So I'll stay on for a few more minutes and give it up for Corey. Thanks so much for your time. And we're sort of officially wrapping up, but if you wanted to stick around for a minute, I would love to stay.